Thanks for clicking! The Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, has just resigned from the leadership of the Liberal Party of Canada.
They pull me back in.
Indeed, though I wasn't set to come back from holidays until January 8th after watching the press conference.
Do you think it's irresponsible to resign? Why not earlier?
I wanted to come back to briefly discuss the resignation, which we thought as of yesterday also wasn't going to happen until the 8th.
Just there, we told me it wouldn't go today.
Yeah, given that, if polling tells us anything, which it often doesn't, but if it does, then we could be set for the election of Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, which wouldn't be that great of news for Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem. But there are some other big implications for Canada that go far beyond the political drama unfolding, including growing uncertainty emanating from down south, our own domestic economic uncertainty, as well as monetary policy. Given that the media didn't really address any of these issues at the press conference, I think it's worth briefly going over what was missed and what to look for in the future. So what I want to do today is briefly go over the Prime Minister's resignation, as well as the press conference held thereafter, discuss what that resignation means for A, our relations with the United States, B, our own domestic economy, and C, the future of Canada's monetary policy. As we'll see today, things are vastly uncertain right now, but we will obviously continue to track Canada's political developments, as well as how those developments affect our relationship with the United States, and how that affects our own economy. Make sure you click like and subscribe if you want to get those updates, but for now, let's get into this resignation. On to the resignation. First off, as mentioned, you'd have to be living under a rock not to know that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau resigned from the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada this morning. And given the massive economic uncertainties that we discussed earlier, and we'll discuss again later, one would expect the first question out of the gate to be about the economy. The first English question out of the gate anyway. I didn't understand the French ones.
Wouldn't you?
But why should these conferences be any different than the ones held by the Bank of Canada? The first question out of the gate, can you give us the gossip?
Up until 3 weeks ago, you were intending to stay, and it seems that the event 3 weeks ago of Ms. Freeland coming out and saying you were firing her as your finance minister was the catalyst that brought us here today. So can you explain your side of what happened there?
That one came from the Toronto Star, and of course the Prime Minister isn't going to answer that question, as this is not TMZ, and of course he did not.
I'm not someone who's in the habit of sharing private conversations.
Now, he's not above letting those conversations get out, mocking the great big economic giant to the south.
Yeah? What else did he say?
Regardless, next, is the Prime Minister too chicken to challenge Pierre Poilievre?
I'm wondering if you feel that another leader will have more success than you will at beating Pierre Poilievre in the next campaign.
The look on his face when being asked this question. Honestly, if these journalists would just read about the issues before they got to the conference.
If you would just use your brain once in a while, you might like it.
Regardless, the Prime Minister, again, didn't really answer the question.
To think smaller, to veer towards the hard right, and to be less ambitious for what we can be and do as a country when the world really needs Canada.
That's not an answer though. Yes or no? Is there another leader that could beat him?
Absolutely.
And finally, and most importantly for our purposes as it was actually substantive, what about the looming Trump tariffs?
How can the Liberal government be in a position to protect Canadian businesses and Canadians from the threat of tariffs from incoming President Donald Trump when members of the government are going to be focused on who's going to be taking your job?
And this brings us to our first problem, the growing tariff threat coming from the United States. Given that we now basically have a figurehead in place, we don't really have much negotiating power at the top. No one to fly down to Mar-a-Lago. Or rather, no one that can deliver on any promises that are being made. To which the Prime Minister at least made a half-hearted attempt to reassure.
The government will still, and the cabinet will still be very much focused on doing the job that Canadians elected us to do in 2021, which is fight for their interests, stand up for their well-being, and make sure that they are good and that Canadians are protected and strong.
The gooder the family around, and gooder it up.
But this definitely could become a problem. While the Liberals are fighting it out amongst each other between Chrystia, Freeland, Mark Carney, and Matt LeBlanc vying for the leadership role, we don't really have anyone negotiating at the top, Though I suppose we do have Pierre Poilievre getting more vocal in his direct communication with newly elected President Donald Trump. But the newly elected president has his own political timelines as well, having already promised to, once taking office, sign an executive order to impose these tariffs. And while we don't have anyone at the top ready to negotiate, the president can't exactly wait for Canada to get its house in order.
Give me a minute.
Second, and related, this resignation is likely to only further augment current uncertainties about the future of Canada's economic development. Avery Shenfield of CIBC recently noted that current uncertainty over the Trump tariffs, whether or not those tariffs even come to fruition, could be enough to stall capital spending in the country. And it wasn't just Shenfield. Desjardins was also warning back in November that even if these tariffs were a negotiation tactic, just the scare alone was enough to have significant impact on investment sentiment for Canada. Given that business investment was likely to stall on the mere threat of Trump tariffs, even before the Prime Minister's resignation, a lack of focus at the top, a lack of negotiating power at the top, is only likely to further enhance those worries. And finally, the third point, monetary policy, the future of interest rates. Given this lack of business investment, this lack of uncertainty at the top, Canada could see even worse economic problems than it was set to already. Given that, as we saw last month, the Bank of Canada was already visibly shaken by the mere threat of these tariffs, let alone with us being without someone able to negotiate at the top, we could see a central bank more inclined to cut interest rates on these moves. A central bank that is increasingly worried about business investment, about business uncertainty, and looking to stimulate activity in the economy, get the economy going again. Yet, in one final point, these interest rate cuts could come amid a continually weakening dollar, as it looks more and more like the United States is going to be keeping rates higher for longer, while the Bank of Canada continues to have to cut to offset the threats of these tariffs. Worries about us importing inflation from the United States, having a weaker dollar, having to pay more for imports, food, cars, etc., those worries are likely to be even more magnified amid this chaos happening at the top. And while yes, the loonie is up today on this resignation, this is just one day, and my guess is yes, we will continue to see more volatility out of the loonie as the markets digest what this means for Canada's economy and the Bank of Canada's path going forward. So, overall, this resignation on the part of the Prime Minister does bring with it a number of increased uncertainties. Uncertainty over what's happening with the United States, how that's going to impact our economy, and how that will in turn impact monetary policy. Though the Bank of Canada governor will no doubt be asked 3 times how this resignation will impact his job going forward at the next press conference held later on in January, and he will give a direct answer to 0 of those questions. That's my first prediction going into a very uncertain year. I'm happy to be back, looking forward to going through these videos and the discussions with all of you. Make sure you click like and subscribe if you want to get those updates, but for now, thanks so much for watching.